Do you know that while you sleep, battles for your life, destiny, and purpose are being waged in the unseen? Every night, the enemy moves in the darkness, targeting your progress, peace, and future. But what if I told you there is a prayer played or spoken at midnight that stands watch while you rest, reversing evil plots, breaking chains, and activating divine protection? This is not a suggestion, it is a strategy. Tonight, your sleep can become your strongest weapon. Stay with me as we unlock the secret to winning battles you don't even see, even while you rest. Midnight is a legal spiritual time, because in the realm of the spirit, time is not only chronological, it is jurisdictional. Certain hours carry authority to transact matters that other hours cannot. Midnight represents a transition point, the crossing from one day to another, a moment when one cycle officially ends and another begins. In spiritual systems, transitions are not empty. They are moments when records are reviewed, permissions are granted, and decisions are enforced. Just as earthly courts have sessions and schedules, the spiritual realm operates by times and seasons, and midnight is one of the most sensitive and potent of those seasons. At midnight, human activity slows down, noise reduces, distractions decrease, the soul becomes quiet, and the spirit becomes more receptive. This silence does not mean inactivity, it means sensitivity. Because fewer voices are speaking in the physical, spiritual voices become clearer. That is why many people experience vivid dreams, sudden fear, heavy oppression, or strange visitations at night. It is not imagination, it is exposure. The spirit is more open at midnight, and openness without authority becomes vulnerability. That is why midnight is dangerous for the unguarded, but powerful for the enlightened. Spiritually, midnight is a time when records are accessed. In scriptures and spiritual patterns, major interventions happened at night because darkness provides cover for spiritual transactions. Covenants are activated, accusations are raised, and permissions are sought. The enemy understands this legal structure, which is why attacks are often scheduled for the night. Sicknesses that worsen at night, anxieties that rise after midnight, recurring dreams, and unexplained heaviness are not random. They are signs of engagement in a time window that allows spiritual forces to operate with fewer physical interruptions. Midnight is also the time when destinies are reviewed. Every life has a divine blueprint, but there are opposing voices that challenge that blueprint. These voices wait for moments of low resistance to speak. When the body sleeps, the mind rests, and the will is quiet, the spirit becomes the main interface. If nothing is speaking on your behalf during that time, other voices will attempt to speak against you. This is why prayer at midnight is not emotional, it is legal. It is standing in a courtroom to present evidence before a verdict is passed. Darkness does not give authority, timing does. The mistake many people make is assuming that night belongs to evil. Night is neutral. What determines ownership is who understands the rules of engagement. When a believer releases prayer at midnight, they are not shouting into the air. They are registering their position in the spirit. Prayer becomes a formal objection against negative verdicts. It becomes a legal document presented before decisions are finalized. That is why one prayer at midnight can cancel months of satanic planning. Midnight prayer works because it aligns with spiritual protocol. It meets the enemy at the time he prefers to operate and confronts him with superior authority. It declares that sleep does not mean surrender and rest does not mean absence. Even when the body is weak, the spirit can be strong if it is properly positioned. This is why prayers played or spoken at midnight continue to function even after consciousness fades. The prayer remains active because words spoken in alignment with divine authority do not expire when the speaker sleeps. Those who understand midnight do not fear the night. They prepare for it. They understand that every new day is introduced in the spirit before it manifests in the physical. Winning the day begins by governing the night. When midnight is covered, morning responds with peace, clarity, strength, and direction. When midnight is ignored, the day begins with battles whose origins cannot be traced, fatigue without labor, resistance without reason, and delays without explanation. Battles do not wait for daylight because spiritual warfare is not governed by human convenience or visibility. Conflict in the unseen realm is strategic. And strategy always targets moments of least resistance. Sleep represents one of the most vulnerable states of human existence, not because the body is weak, but because awareness is reduced. When the mind disengages from conscious control and the senses shut down, the spirit becomes the primary point of contact. This does not automatically invite danger, but it creates an environment where engagement is easier for both good and evil forces. That is why attacks are often scheduled for the night, not as superstition, but as calculated timing. When a person is awake, their will is active, their reasoning is alert, and their discernment can resist or question spiritual impressions. During sleep, these defenses are quiet. The enemy understands that access does not always require permission. Sometimes it only requires silence. Many spiritual attacks are not loud or dramatic. They are subtle transfers, suggestions, impressions, and alterations that occur quietly. A dream can carry more influence than a conversation because it bypasses logic and speaks directly to the inner man. This is why repeated negative dreams often precede real-life patterns of delay, fear, confusion, or stagnation. Scriptural patterns reveal that night seasons are commonly associated with unexpected spiritual encounters. Fear that rises suddenly after midnight, heaviness that settles without explanation, or recurring dreams that follow the same theme are not coincidental. These are indicators of engagement. The enemy does not always come to destroy immediately. Sometimes he comes to plant a seed of fear, a seed of doubt, a seed of weariness. These seeds grow silently and manifest later in decisions, emotions, and outcomes. By the time the effect is visible in daylight, the cause has already occurred in darkness. Sleep itself is not the problem. The issue is unguarded sleep. Many people assume that because they prayed earlier in the day, the night will automatically be covered. But spiritual activity does not run on assumptions. Just as a city locks its gates at night because danger increases when visibility decreases, spiritual wisdom understands that night requires intentional covering. The enemy does not respect routine prayers if they lack awareness of timing. He studies patterns, schedules emotional states, and spiritual gaps. He attacks when resistance is lowest, not when strength is highest. Another reason attacks happen at night is because night amplifies spiritual sensitivity. The reduction of physical noise allows spiritual impressions to become stronger. This is why dreams feel more real than imagination, and why night fears feel heavier than daytime worries. The spirit is more exposed, and exposure without reinforcement becomes vulnerability. This does not mean everyone under attack is sinful or weak. Often increased attacks indicate increased value. What threatens darkness attracts opposition. The enemy invests his efforts where potential is high. Battles at night are also designed to confuse the source of struggle. When a person wakes up tired without physical labor, anxious without visible cause, or discouraged without bad news, they often blame themselves or circumstances. This misdirection is strategic. If the origin of the battle is misunderstood, the solution will be misplaced. Many people attempt to fix spiritual problems with physical solutions, not realizing that the battle began while they slept. Understanding that attacks occur at night restores responsibility, not fear. It shifts awareness from ignorance to positioning. When a person knows that the night is active, they stop being passive. They recognize that rest must be protected and sleep must be governed. Spiritual authority does not switch off with consciousness. What is established before sleep continues during sleep. This is why words spoken in faith before rest carry authority throughout the night. The goal of the enemy is not merely to disturb sleep, but to influence destiny quietly. Recognizing this truth changes how one approaches the night, not with anxiety, but with intentional spiritual coverage. Sleep is not weakness because rest was designed as a divine system for renewal, restoration, and balance. From the beginning, sleep was built into human existence, not as an escape from responsibility, but as a necessary rhythm that sustains life. The body repairs itself during sleep, the mind reorganizes information, and the spirit gains space from the noise of daily activity. Weakness is not found in rest. Weakness appears when rest is disconnected from awareness and authority. The problem is not that a person sleeps, but that they sleep without spiritual boundaries in place. Unguarded sleep creates exposure, not because sleep itself invites harm, but but because every form of rest requires protection. Just as a house needs doors and locks at night, the human life requires spiritual covering during periods of lowered consciousness. When a person sleeps, their physical defenses are inactive, their decision-making faculties are quiet, and their environment becomes still. This stillness is not empty, it is an open space. If that space is not intentionally filled with alignment, other influences attempt to occupy it. This is why the idea that sleep automatically equals safety is flawed. Safety is established, not assumed. Many people misunderstand spiritual strength and think it is measured by constant activity or wakefulness. True strength is measured by governance. A strong person is not one who never rests, but one who rests wisely. Sleep becomes dangerous only when it is passive and unintentional. Unguarded sleep allows spiritual impressions to enter without resistance. Thoughts, emotions, and suggestions can be introduced quietly through dreams and subconscious influence. These influences may not appear harmful at first, but they shape attitudes, reactions, and expectations over time. The reason unguarded sleep is risky is because the subconscious mind remains active even when the conscious mind shuts down. During this time, whatever has permission can speak. Fear does not need volume to be effective. It only needs access. Doubt does not need logic to spread. It only needs repetition. Nighttime impressions often bypass reasoning and settle directly into the inner man. This is why people can wake up feeling discouraged, anxious, or heavy without a clear cause. Something spoke while they rested, and because there was no filter in place, the message was received. Spiritual authority does not automatically operate during sleep unless it has been consciously established beforehand. Authority works by agreement. What you authorize while awake continues while you sleep. If a person enters sleep without spiritual alignment, they leave the night unmanaged. Unguarded sleep does not mean something bad will always happen, but it means something can happen without resistance. This distinction is critical. Weakness implies lack of capacity, but unguardedness implies lack of positioning. A strong person who leaves a door open is not weak, they are exposed. Dreams are one of the clearest indicators of this principle. Dreams are not always messages, but they are always interactions. They reflect what has access to the inner space. When sleep is guarded, dreams may still occur, but they do not carry oppressive weight. When sleep is unguarded, dreams can become repetitive, draining, or disturbing. This is not because the person lacks faith, but because authority was not consciously enforced over the resting state. Guarding sleep does not require fear or obsession. It requires intentional alignment. What a person listens to before sleep, what they declare, and what atmosphere they create all contribute to whether rest is protected. Unguarded sleep is passive. Guarded sleep is restful yet governed. One invites vulnerability. The other sustains peace. The difference between the two is not effort, but awareness and positioning. Prayer can stand watch while your body rests, because prayer is not a physical activity limited by consciousness. It is a spiritual transaction sustained by authority. The body requires sleep to recover strength, but the spirit does not sleep in the same way the body does. When prayer is released with understanding, it functions beyond the moment it is spoken. Words spoken in alignment with divine authority do not collapse when the speaker rests. They continue to operate as an active spiritual force. This is why prayer is able to guard, defend, and enforce boundaries even when the body is completely inactive. Prayer works by delegation. When a person prays intentionally before sleep, they are not asking their physical strength to stay awake. They are assigning responsibility in the spirit. Just as a security system continues to function when the homeowner is asleep, prayer establishes spiritual systems that remain active without constant human effort. This understanding shifts prayer from effort to positioning. The power is not in staying awake all night, but in authorizing the right presence to remain active throughout the night. The misconception many people have is that prayer only works while they are actively praying. This reduces prayer to a human activity rather than a spiritual law. In reality, prayer establishes agreements. Once an agreement is established, it remains valid until it is overridden. When a person prays with clarity and authority, they are issuing standing instructions. These instructions do not expire with sleep because they were not powered by physical energy to begin with. They were powered by spiritual alignment. This is why prayers played or spoken before sleep can continue to guard a person through the night. Sound carries spiritual influence, but authority is what gives sound longevity. When prayer is released in faith, it fills the atmosphere and sets parameters. Those parameters define what is permitted and what is denied access. Sleep does not cancel those permissions. The body may rest, but the spiritual environment remains governed by what was spoken into it. Prayer standing watch also explains why some people wake up with peace despite having slept through difficult nights, while others wake up drained without any visible disturbance. The difference is not the quality of sleep, but the presence or absence of spiritual coverage. When prayer stands watch, it filters what reaches the inner man. Attacks may still attempt access, but they encounter resistance. Impressions may try to form, but they are neutralized before settling. The person rests while prayer enforces boundaries. Another dimension of this truth is that prayer invites assistance beyond human limitation. When prayer is released, it authorizes spiritual enforcement that does not depend on human alertness. This means the responsibility of defense is transferred from the individual to the spiritual systems activated by prayer. This transfer is critical because humans are not designed to be conscious at all times. Prayer bridges the gap between human limitation and spiritual continuity. Prayer standing watch does not mean the night becomes inactive. It means the night becomes regulated. Activities may still occur in the unseen, but they occur under supervision rather than in chaos. This is why consistent night prayer changes dream patterns, emotional stability, and morning disposition. The night is no longer a time of exposure, but a time of maintenance. The soul rests knowing something is guarding the gates. This principle also reveals why careless words before sleep can be harmful. Just as prayer establishes coverage, negative declarations establish openings. Whatever is authorized before rest tends to remain active during rest. Prayer stands watch because it was intentionally assigned that role. Silence, fear, or distraction can also stand watch if they are given permission. The night does not choose what governs it. The individual does through alignment. Understanding this removes pressure from the idea that one must always be spiritually alert in a physical sense. Rest becomes possible without fear because prayer has already taken responsibility. Sleep becomes safer, not because danger disappears, but because authority has been established. The body rests within a governed space, the mind quiets within protected boundaries, and the spirit remains aligned with what was authorized before consciousness faded. The voice of prayer can travel where your consciousness cannot, because spiritual authority is not limited by awareness, location, or physical presence. Consciousness belongs to the mind, but prayer proceeds from the spirit, and the spirit operates beyond the boundaries of the senses. When a person prays, they are not merely expressing thoughts, they are releasing sound backed by authority. That sound does not depend on whether the mind remains awake. Once released, it enters a realm where distance, time, and alertness do not restrict movement or effectiveness. Human consciousness has limits. It can only focus on one place at a time, and it shuts down completely during deep sleep. Prayer does not follow these limitations because it is not sustained by mental focus alone. It is sustained by alignment. When prayer is spoken in faith, it carries intention, authorization, and direction. These elements give it the ability to move into spaces the mind cannot reach, address matters the person is not aware of, and confront situations the body has never encountered physically. This is why prayer can intervene in matters a person did not consciously know existed. There are conflicts, delays, and resistances that operate beneath the surface of daily life. They do not always announce themselves clearly. Sometimes they appear as repeated patterns, unexplained opposition, or internal heaviness without visible cause. Consciousness struggles to identify these roots because they are not always logical or visible. Prayer bypasses the need for awareness by addressing the unseen source directly. It does not require the believer to understand every detail to be effective. The voice of prayer carries spiritual reach. In the unseen realm, sound functions as command, not noise. Words spoken in alignment with divine authority act as signals and summons. They attract reinforcement, establish boundaries, and initiate action. This is why prayer can reach into environments the individual has never physically entered. A person may be sleeping in one place while prayer is addressing matters connected to their future, their family, or their destiny in another. Consciousness cannot multitask in this way, but prayer can. Prayer also travels beyond time. There are moments when battles are rooted in past decisions, generational patterns, or future threats. The conscious mind operates mostly in the present, but prayer is not restricted to the now. When released with authority, it can confront the residue of the past and preempt challenges that have not yet manifested. This is not imagination, it is the nature of spiritual transactions. Prayer speaks into timelines the mind cannot access. Another reason prayer travels where consciousness cannot is because it is not self-powered. Prayer draws strength from a higher source. This means its effectiveness does not rise and fall with human energy levels. When consciousness fades due to sleep or exhaustion, prayer does not weaken because it was never dependent on personal strength to begin with. It was dependent on alignment. Once alignment is established, the prayer continues to function even in the absence of mental engagement. This principle explains why prayer can bring peace. Even when the person does not remember praying through the night, the results appear without conscious recollection because the work was not done at the level of memory. It was done at the level of authority. Peace, protection, and clarity appear in the morning, not because the mind stayed active, but because prayer traveled into spaces where resistance would have formed and dismantled it before it surfaced. The voice of prayer also carries identity. In the unseen realm, it is recognized not by volume but by authorization. Just as a legal document remains valid even when the signer is asleep, prayer remains effective because it carries the signature of authority. Consciousness is not required for enforcement once authorization has been granted. This understanding changes the way prayer is valued. It is no longer seen as a momentary activity, but as a release with ongoing impact. Prayer becomes an extension of governance rather than expression. The mind rests, the body sleeps, but the voice of prayer continues its assignment, moving through realms the individual cannot enter consciously, addressing matters they cannot perceive, and establishing outcomes they will only discover later through peace, clarity, and direction. Midnight prayers reverse evil verdicts and satanic calendars because the spirit realm operates on decisions, schedules, and permissions rather than emotions or coincidence. Nothing significant happens in the unseen without authorization, and authorization is often tied to timing. Midnight represents a point where transitions occur, where one cycle officially closes and another is inaugurated. In spiritual systems, transitions are moments when records are reviewed and determinations are enforced. Evil verdicts are not random attacks. They are conclusions drawn from accusations, patterns, or previous permissions. Midnight becomes a favored time for enforcing those conclusions because it sits at the boundary between what was and what is about to be. An evil verdict is essentially a spiritual judgment designed to produce a physical outcome. It may manifest as repeated delay, loss, confusion, sickness, or resistance without a clear natural cause. These verdicts are often scheduled, not spontaneous. This is what is meant by satanic calendars. Darkness does not operate chaotically, it operates strategically. Certain days, seasons, and hours are targeted because they align with access points in a person's life. When midnight arrives, it becomes an opportunity to activate what has already been planned because the environment is quieter and resistance is assumed to be lower. Midnight prayer works as a reversal because it confronts the verdict before it fully manifests. It is not merely asking for help, it is contesting a decision. In spiritual terms, silence is agreement. When no opposing voice is present, accusations stand uncontested. Midnight prayer introduces a higher authority into the process. It functions like an appeal filed before a sentence is executed. The power is not in the hour alone, but in the alignment of timing with authority. When prayer is released at midnight, it meets the verdict at the point of enforcement. Satanic calendars rely on predictability. Patterns of weakness, emotional exhaustion, ignorance, and neglect are studied. When a person repeatedly ignores the night season, it becomes an open appointment. Darkness thrives on unattended schedules. Midnight prayer disrupts this by showing up where absence was expected. It breaks the rhythm that evil operations depend on. When prayer consistently occupies that time, scheduled attacks lose their advantage. What was meant to happen quietly encounters resistance. Reversal happens because prayer does not only block, it rewrites. When a higher authority speaks, previous decisions lose legitimacy. In spiritual law, the superior voice overrules the inferior one. Midnight prayer introduces divine authorization into a space where negative authorization was assumed to dominate. This changes outcomes not only for that night, but for the pattern attached to it. Once a calendar is disrupted repeatedly, it loses its power to predict and enforce. Another dimension of reversal is that midnight prayer addresses root causes rather than symptoms. Many daytime struggles are merely echoes of night decisions. A person may fight all day without progress because the issue was already settled in the unseen hours earlier. Midnight prayer goes to the source. It confronts the origin rather than managing the effect. This is why some problems dissolve without logical explanation after consistent night prayer. The verdict that sustained them was removed. Midnight prayer also reverses momentum. Evil verdicts gain strength through continuity. Once something begins to happen repeatedly, it creates spiritual inertia. Midnight prayer interrupts that flow at its weakest point, the moment of transition. When momentum is broken, continuation becomes difficult. What was meant to progress stalls. What was meant to escalate loses energy. The authority of midnight prayer lies in its insistence. It declares that no time is surrendered and no schedule is conceded. It establishes that destiny is not governed by darkness's timetable. Each time midnight prayer is released, it reinforces a counter calendar, one governed by divine purpose rather than opposition. Over time, this creates a new rhythm where nights become neutralized and mornings arrive without the weight of unseen battles already lost. This is why those who understand midnight prayer often experience unexplained preservation, delayed attacks that never land, and patterns that suddenly lose their grip. The reversal is not always dramatic, but it is decisive. Something planned does not happen. Something expected fails to manifest. Something assumed loses permission. And the day unfolds without the resistance that was scheduled in the unseen hours before dawn. Angels respond to authorized prayers released at night because spiritual beings operate on instruction, hierarchy, and legality rather than emotion or human effort. Angels are not attracted by desperation or volume, they respond to authority. When a prayer is authorized, it carries permission that aligns with divine order, and that permission activates angelic movement. Nighttime does not reduce angelic activity. In many ways, it heightens it because the spiritual atmosphere becomes clearer and less crowded by human distraction. What seems like stillness in the physical realm often corresponds to heightened organization in the unseen. Authorized prayer means prayer that is aligned with divine will, spoken from a position of spiritual identity rather than fear. Angels are assigned to words that carry legitimacy. When such words are released at night, they enter a space where enforcement is expected. The night is often assumed to belong to darkness, but angels do not retreat when the sun sets. They operate continuously, awaiting commands that are legally valid. When prayer meets that standard, angels respond without delay, regardless of the hour. Night prayers are significant because many spiritual operations are scheduled for the night. Angels are fully aware of these schedules, not as participants in darkness, but as enforcers of divine order. When an authorized prayer is released, it intersects with ongoing spiritual activity. This intersection creates immediate relevance. Angels are dispatched to intervene, restrain, redirect, or protect based on the content of the prayer. The timing enhances the urgency because the night is often when outcomes are being positioned for manifestation in the day. Angels respond to authorization, not consciousness. A person does not need to remain awake for angelic activity to continue. Once a prayer assigns responsibility, angels carry out their assignment independently of human awareness. This is why a person can sleep peacefully while spiritual protection is actively enforced. The prayer does not remain idle waiting for human supervision. Angels do not require reminders. They respond to initial instruction and remain active until their assignment is complete or revoked. Another reason angels respond strongly to night prayers is because the environment is less conflicted. During the day, human emotions, words, and actions create constant spiritual traffic. At night, this traffic reduces, making directives clearer. Authorized prayer released into this quieter environment stands out. It is easier to execute because there is less interference. This does not mean angels struggle during the day, but it explains why night prayers often produce swift and noticeable results. Angels also operate within territorial and personal assignments. Authorized prayer activates these assignments intentionally. When prayer is released over a person, home, or destiny at night, it reinforces angelic jurisdiction over that space. This jurisdiction limits what opposing forces can do. Angels do not act randomly, they enforce boundaries. Prayer defines those boundaries. Nighttime prayer strengthens them at a moment when they would otherwise be tested. Authorized prayer also gives angels clarity. Vague words produce vague outcomes. Clear declarations produce clear enforcement. When prayer is intentional, specific, and aligned, angels know exactly what to protect, what to block, and what to release. This clarity is especially powerful at night because operations are already in motion. Angels do not wait for daylight to act. They act when instruction is received. The response of angels is not emotional reassurance, but functional intervention. They may influence circumstances, guard environments, redirect plans, or neutralize threats before they manifest physically. Many people experience protection without ever knowing what was prevented. This is often the result of angelic activity responding to authorized prayer. The night passes quietly because something was enforced unseen. Angels do not replace human responsibility, but they complement it. Prayer releases responsibility upward, and angels carry it outward. This cooperation allows human rest without spiritual neglect. Night prayer does not eliminate opposition. It ensures opposition is managed. Angels stand watch where human senses cannot. They respond to authority because authority reflects order, and order governs the unseen realm. Understanding this removes the idea that prayer at night is symbolic or optional. It becomes strategic. Angels are not impressed by routine, but respond to alignment. When prayer is authorized, angels recognize it immediately and move accordingly. The night becomes a workspace rather than a vulnerability, a time of reinforcement rather than exposure, a season where unseen assistance is activated through words spoken with authority and intention. Consistency turns midnight prayer into a spiritual defense system because repetition establishes structure, and structure creates stability in the spirit realm. One-time actions can produce results, but systems produce sustained outcomes. The unseen realm responds strongly to patterns because patterns indicate intention and permanence. When midnight prayer is practiced consistently, it moves from being an occasional intervention to becoming an established spiritual mechanism. It signals that a territory is not temporarily guarded, but permanently governed. A defense system is not activated only when danger appears. It operates continuously to prevent danger from gaining access in the first place. Consistent midnight prayer works in the same way. Instead of reacting to attacks after they manifest, it creates resistance before attacks are formed. The unseen realm recognizes repetition as commitment. When prayer repeatedly occupies the same spiritual time window, it establishes authority over that window. What was once an open period becomes a regulated one. Consistency creates predictability in the spirit realm, and predictability favors authority. When midnight prayer is consistent, opposing forces begin to anticipate resistance. This anticipation weakens their strategy. Darkness thrives on surprise and absence. When it encounters a fixed pattern of prayer, it loses the advantage of timing. What was once a silent hour becomes contested territory. Over time, this contest shifts into control. A spiritual defense system also functions automatically. Once established, it does not require emotional intensity every night to remain effective. The power is not in how strongly one feels, but in how firmly the pattern has been laid. Just as a fortified city does not rebuild its walls every night, consistent midnight prayer does not need to start from zero each time. Each prayer reinforces what already exists. The system grows stronger with time because it is cumulative. Consistency also trains the inner man. Repeated midnight prayer conditions spiritual alertness even during rest. The soul learns peace, the spirit learns authority, and fear loses influence. This internal alignment is part of the defense system. A guarded inner environment is harder to penetrate. When the night repeatedly ends without disturbance, confidence replaces anxiety. The person no longer approaches sleep with uncertainty, but with assurance that coverage is already in place. Another aspect of consistency is territorial marking. In the unseen realm, whatever occupies a space consistently gains legal standing in that space. Midnight prayer marks the night season as occupied. This occupation does not mean constant activity, but recognized ownership. Once ownership is established, intrusion requires higher effort. Many attacks fail not because they were weak, but because the territory was already claimed through consistent spiritual engagement. Consistency also filters spiritual input. Not everything that attempts access is hostile, but everything requires evaluation. A consistent prayer system regulates what is allowed to influence the inner man during sleep. Dreams become clearer, emotional stability improves, and confusion reduces. This is not coincidence, it is the effect of sustained governance. When the system is absent, the night becomes unpredictable. When it is present, outcomes stabilize. A defense system improves with time because it adapts. As consistent midnight prayer continues, discernment increases. The individual becomes more aware of subtle changes in atmosphere, patterns, and resistance. This awareness strengthens the system further. Prayer becomes more precise, declarations become clear, and alignment deepens. The system evolves without conscious effort because repetition sharpens sensitivity. Consistency also removes fear from spiritual practice. Sporadic prayer often comes from crisis, but consistent prayer comes from understanding. A defense system is calm, not frantic. Midnight prayer practiced consistently does not feel like emergency response, it feels like maintenance. This mindset shift is critical. Fear weakens authority, but stability strengthens it. Over time, consistent midnight prayer alters spiritual expectations. Nights that once carried heaviness become neutral. Mornings that once began with unexplained fatigue begin with clarity. This shift happens gradually but decisively. The defense system does not announce its success. It reveals it through absence of chaos. Things that used to happen simply stop happening. Patterns that once repeated lose continuity. Resistance that once felt normal fades without dramatic confrontation. Consistency is what transforms prayer from an action into an atmosphere. When midnight prayer is consistent, the night no longer waits for instruction. It already knows its boundaries. The unseen realm recognizes that this life is not unattended during transitions. The defense system stands not because someone is awake, but because authority has been repeatedly and intentionally established over time. Tonight, as you lay down to rest, remember this: your sleep does not have to be a time of vulnerability. When you release this midnight prayer, you are standing guard over your life, your destiny, and your future. You are activating divine protection, reversing evil schemes, and inviting angelic reinforcement to fight battles on your behalf. Darkness no longer has power over you because authority has been established. Rest with confidence, knowing that while your body sleeps, your spirit is defended, your path is secured, and your tomorrow is already shifting in your favor.